It is 5:06. I am calling to order the special board meeting of January 29th, 2026. Mrs. Schopp, may we get a roll call?
Yes. Carol Fox,
Here.
Megan Miller,
Present?
Brian Nichols.
Here.
Tom Hankins and Amy Levy are unable to be here this evening. Joanne Rue
Here.
and Tia Johnson.
Here.
All members are present then, except Tom and Amy.
Thank you. May I get an approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Brian Nichols, seconded by Carol Fox. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Our first and only agenda item tonight is the Open Literacy and Skyrocket Information Session. The purpose of this will be an opportunity for board members to discuss with representatives from Open Literacy and Skyrocket the services and programs they have to offer. Board members will have an opportunity to ask questions and gather additional information. Tonight we have Dr. Anderson and Lisa Furseth and the representatives. Dr. Anderson, do you want to introduce the group?
Well, I'm going to let Lisa do most of the introductions, but I will tell you that we were able to meet Mike and Sarah this afternoon, the principals and directors. So we were already able to get a little bit of a foretaste of what you're going to hear tonight, to learn about Skyrocket and to learn about open literacy. I think the presentation we had earlier was very well received, and we're interested in learning more. So I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Great, thank you. First off, we really do appreciate the time with the principals this afternoon. It was really a helpful discussion. We did make copies of the decks that we used today, and Michelle has those if anyone wants to take one with them when they leave. So good evening, and thanks again for all the time. I've asked each of our guests to introduce themselves as a part of their presentation, so I'm going to yield the evening to our discussion with them. But before I do, I'm going to make 3 requests for tonight. The first, to ground the dialogue in our offer of a pilot, one school. Our intent in making this offer was to provide a tool to support staff, elevate outcomes for students, and offer a learning tool that can assist your board in developing a district-wide vision for the future. This is a tool to support that work. This is not that work. At Monday's meeting, Board Member Miller respectfully asked for the opportunity to be transparent and to have feedback accepted in the spirit given. Today, I'm going to ask for the same. I'm going to name that I believe for some, the core question isn't about these interventions, but is about the question of whether or not the district should partner with our foundation. And because that hasn't been explicitly named, I sense that it bleeds in other parts of the discussion. So my second request is we put that issue in the parking lot and we find a time down the road to actually discuss that, and not let that question shadow the exploration work with these organizations. And finally, one of the greatest gifts I've received in engaging in the hard work of education is the privilege to get to know some amazing and gifted people, including the 2 who are our guests tonight. Both Michael and Sarah have devoted their professional work to challenging us and then supporting us in doing the very best we can for kids. My final request is that we offer them our full attention tonight. They both dug themselves out of East Coast snow to be here with us. And I ask for your openness and curiosity centered on this question. Do these organizations offer something that can benefit your staff and the children of this city? We had discussions Monday about strategic plans, other tutor models, decision making, all important, but I'm asking you to set those aside for tonight and focus on the work that these organizations do. With that, I think you have heard more than enough from me, and I am incredibly pleased to give the stage to Michael.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Hey, everybody. Let me just start my timer. It's great to see you, and it's great to be here. I appreciate your time and attention. And I was saying earlier that I've spent quite a bit of time in Beloit over the years, but have not gotten the opportunity to connect with the people in this room. So really honored to be with you today. I am the CEO and founder of Skyrocket Education. We are an on-site 1-to-1, sometimes 1-to-2, sometimes 1-to-5, sometimes 1-to-15 technical service provider, specializing in the areas of school leader development and effectiveness, instructional effectiveness, instructional coaching effectiveness, and school culture. And before I talk about our model in more depth, and we get to some Q&A, I want to just talk about our agenda here. And I'll spend a little bit of time on like why I started Skyrocket, what it actually looks like in practice, and then we'll do some, I make a distinction between coaching as we describe it versus the way most people in our work describe it. And then we'll do some Q&A at the end, which I'm really excited for. So I want to go forward. Back in 2012, I was the director of strategic partnerships for a school district in Philadelphia. I had the good fortune to work with schools all over the country. We had global partnerships as well. Most of that work was me training those folks on our school culture, instructional, school leadership, and teacher coaching models. But a lot of it was me learning from those folks as well. And I say we worked from east to west and north to south all over this great country. And in that time, 3 real trends emerged as it pertained to what folks prioritized in their schools, their school culture, their instruction, their development of teachers, their development of other leaders. And I'll go through these relatively quickly, but in that first picture on the top left, many schools, many districts hadn't defined almost at all what good looks like. Everything from what is a good leadership team meeting look like to what does it look like to have a really effective coaching meeting with teachers, to what are we actually looking for when we go into classrooms? What rubrics or frameworks are we using to determine if what we're seeing is actually effective? In those cases, as you can imagine, without any sort of anchoring documents, without any sort of agreement as to what good is, really smart, really talented, really passionate, and sometimes really experienced school leaders were talking very hesitantly about the things that were happening in their schools. In the second bucket, off to the right, you see that person kind of drowning in papers, and in those schools, folks had so much. They had walkthrough tools, they had rubrics, they had frameworks, they had all these different things that, from my experience, almost nobody was an expert on. They had a sense of those things versus a really clear, I can walk into any space or place in my building, and say, yep, this is exactly what it's supposed to look like, or no, this is not, and let's then determine what steps we need to take to coach people up to get to that really great place. And so these folks, not unlike when I was a first-year teacher and they gave me a 25-page handbook as to what good teaching looked like, and I threw it in the bottom drawer of my desk and never looked at it again until it was evaluation time, and then I took it out, I blew the dust off of it, and that happened about twice a year. So we were just giving people too many things in these cases. And then in the last bucket, whether folks found themselves in the first box or the second, folks were cherry picking specific skills, things that their schools didn't necessarily need. Sometimes that came from the district level. Sometimes it came from school leadership. The story I shared with the principals earlier, which I'll reiterate now, was on my very first trip to Detroit Public Schools back in 2014. They had just run a training around a questioning strategy called Cold Call, which I imagine many people here know what that is. They were so excited about Cold Call. They were thrilled that they'd run this training on Cold Call, and I was at my very first school that day, right from the airport. The first bell rings, and there are 70 students in the hallway pushing and shoving, and I start talking to the teachers. I say, how was the training on Cold Call? And they said, it was fine, but I need to know how to get my kids to sit down. And so in so many places we were coaching, or so many people were getting coached around and trained around things that not only weren't driven by data, but were just like kind of the topic of the moment, the cherry-picked skill that people didn't really need. And so I said, how do we actually change that? And so I created the Skyrocket frameworks. Now, all of our board members have these up there. I'm not going to ask you with the 10 minutes or so that I have left to go through them now, though I know some of you have gone online and some of you have taken a look at these. But really what I wanted to do was using research, using best practices, using all of the things that I learned from amazing educators around the country, is to create the simplest, most direct frameworks for school culture, school leadership, and teacher development in the country. I was adamant, one of our values at Skyrocket is keep it simple. I was adamant that it fit on one page front and back. I was adamant that it be an actual usable document and not the thing that's thrown in the drawer that never to be seen again. And so things to notice about our frameworks, they're the only ones anywhere that are hierarchical, meaning we're coaching people where they are. We're coaching them where they are to get them to where we want them to be, but we're not asking a struggling teacher to get students into groups of 5 and to have collaborative working groups when they're having trouble getting kids to stop talking. We're not asking leaders to do some of the more robust and deeper strand 2 and strand 3 actions, like deeply coaching teachers before they've gotten some of the classroom or school culture stuff figured out. And so really our model is, let's go slow to go fast. I've seen zero evidence anywhere that people can get really good at 5 or 6 things at one time. And probably more importantly, it's almost impossible for us as leaders to follow up on those things. And so what happens in a lot of schools, we give way too much feedback on way too many things. We can't follow up on it, and then the thing goes away. And the teacher or the assistant principal or the coach says, wow, I endured that time with Michael, but I didn't get even a lick better. And guess what? I'm not going to do any of the stuff he asked me to do. Not because they're jerks, but because it's really hard to get really good at a lot of things at once. So our model's hierarchical. All of the actions are provided. They're in there. The language is in there. It's precise. It's succinct. The whole doc, all the language in the doc itself, it's bite-sized. One of my, one of my pride points, I know pride's a sin, but when I am feeling prideful, it's when I go to classrooms and teachers have our framework taped up on the wall behind their desk. And I've never seen anybody do that with other frameworks because it's too much and there's too many pages. And so it's a really cool thing when folks say, yeah, this matters and this is digestible and this makes sense to me. The actions progress in each of our strands from planning to execution. And in our last, so they move from like the design, the intellectual prep, to the actual execution in the school or in the classroom. And then it's all grounded in the outcomes. I see a lot of frameworks and a lot of rubrics that are focused solely on teachers. I think we have some teachers in the room, and I remember as a teacher that was very frustrating to be coached on, you're not doing this, you need to do that, you need to do that. I tell our partners, I don't care if you're juggling flaming chainsaws on top of your desk. If you're getting results, that's what we're focused on. So we're looking at the outcomes. I do actually care about that because it's dangerous, but my point, I think, is you understand my point. We're really looking at what are the outcomes, what are we producing here, and we're moving backward from there. How does what the school leader is doing directly affect staff engagement? How does what every teacher is doing directly affect deep, rigorous thinking from our students? And so when I think about our model, I break it down into 8 separate facets. And The frameworks we already spoke about, those are our grounding documents. Everything we do stems from our frameworks. They are curriculum and programming agnostic, whatever they are. We're not trying to change anybody's code of conduct or anything like that. We're not changing the programming that folks are using. We are supporting schools in executing those things in the most effective ways possible. Our work is totally unbiased. It is grounded in data. There's not what I think or what I feel. And with our rubrics as the starting point, in some cases the end point, that's actually really easy to do because I'm able to say to a leader, okay, great, so the bell rang. How many scholars were in the hallway after the bell rang? Okay, 14, great. What's the cause of that? Cool, let's directly address those things. How long did that entry routine take? It took 6 minutes and 11 seconds. How long should it take? Under 90. Okay, we're losing 2 weeks of school at the end of the year because that teacher needs more coaching around effective transitions. So we are rooted in data, but that doesn't mean the human side's not there. We focus heavily on communication. Our model is called the DASH model. It's data-driven, authentic, straight, so we don't sugarcoat anything, and of course helpful. So it's not, Megan, do this. When I come back, I better see it. It's no, I'm going to support you around this. I'm going to be an advocate for you. How can I support you most effectively in making this happen? Our work is grounded in practice, so we don't tell folks, we show folks, we practice with them. This is a shift for a lot of people in our work who are very used to sending an email and crossing their fingers. The educators in this room will know that that rarely leads to change. And what it does, it almost, it creates potentially a dynamic where our teachers and our other leaders become really good at ignoring our feedback because they sent us an email, we didn't do anything about it, they didn't say anything, and then we moved on. We have really high expectations for our partners. We do what we say we're going to do. We have sky-high integrity. We say high expectations, high support. And then everything's rooted in goals. I talked to Megan about this beforehand. We start any partnership with an audit of the school. We then provide a report for the school. We then collectively set goals based on our findings. Of course, leaders are free to say, hey, that wasn't accurate. That was a random day. If that's the case, it rarely happens, but if that's the case, we'll revisit. But mostly what we're doing is we're using that grounding document to set our goals for the rest of the year, or for the immediate future, rather. We are high on accountability. I use the example with the leaders. If Wayne says he's going to send me something by 4 p.m. on Thursday and it's not in my inbox by 4 p.m. at 4:01, he gets an email. He's not in trouble. I'm not mad at him. It's just me looking at where the breakdown was. What did I not do effectively enough to make that thing happen? And then real-time coaching, which is the process of providing feedback for teachers, leaders in the moment, not sending an email 3 days later. We use the example of if I had food on my face right now and Tia sent me an email 3 days from now about it, that wouldn't be very helpful, but that's what we're doing in schools at all time. And so honoring our professionals, honoring their expertise, never undermining them, framing it in a way that asks permission. Excuse me, Ms. Johnson, can I interject for one moment? Can you reset the expectations for scholars right now? Are they at a level 1 or at a level 0? I'm just not sure all the kids here. That is something that our model is very big on. And then, of course, it's all grounded in relationships. Somebody once joked that our strand 0 should be relationships because we are big on connectedness. I pride myself and our team on really getting to know our partners and knowing quite a bit about them and their community and what makes them tick. With these last couple moments I have here, friends, I just want to make a distinction between what we call coaching and what most people call coaching. And if you look at that box on the left, we think of coaching very much the way, for those athletes in the room or former athletes or athletic coaches, we think of it very much like that. High rep, really clear steps for what good looks like, and then high repetition practice, not until they get it right, but until they can't get it wrong. Part of the reason why so many schools are having the same conversations in May that they were in September is because they're sending emails and, like I said, crossing fingers versus saying, hey, Joanne, let's work on this thing. Let's script it out. Let's practice it. Okay, I know you have to have an essential conversation. Let's have that conversation. Let's practice it. Say it to me. Great. Say it again. I think this part could shift. What do you think about that? And then we go from there. And we have those questions on the side right there, which is after every meeting. I'm not talking about a transactional meeting to talk about the next field trip. I'm talking about an actual development meeting. We ask our coaches to ask themselves, and if one of your schools winds up being a partner school, I would be asking this question of principals, assistant principals, instructional coaches, whomever, did the person you met with just get significantly better at something? Do they know their next steps? And have you put systems in place to hold them accountable? We don't think of accountability as a bad word at Skyrocket. We think it's actually the kindest thing you can do for someone. We look at it as a handshake. We agree on this thing, and once we agree on it, we both have to keep up our end of the bargain, and if one of us misses, we're not in trouble. We're not mad at anybody. But we want to find out why, and we want to make sure that we don't do it again. Friends, thank you so much. I am interested and eager to hear any questions that you have on the Skyrocket model.
Thank you, Michael. Any board members have any questions or comments? Carol? Go ahead.
How do you get started? How much time, what kind of time commitment is expected? And where were you 25 years ago?
I'll start with that. 25 years ago, I was bartending in New York City, so I don't know that I would have been much help for you to you back then. But yeah, we start with the audit. That's the foundational piece. What's actually happening in here, making sure that we're aligned. We've done dozens and dozens and dozens of these. There's never been an instance where we've presented a report to a school leader where they've said, I disagree with this. So maybe this would be the first, but I can't imagine that would be the case. We present the report to them. We interview everybody on staff, or as many people as we can. We observe everything from arrival to dismissal to transitions. We get into every single classroom. We want to see any sort of leadership team meetings. We create and on and on and on. We create the plan from there. Then this program is a very high touch. We're looking at 3 days a week on site at whichever the partner school is. But like I said to one of the principals earlier, this is not I'm at your school 3 days a week and your life stops and you're not doing anything. No, we might go on walkthroughs together. You might have an IEP meeting to step into while I'm actually meeting with one of your instructional coaches. I then may be in your office typing up some of my findings. I then sit in on your leadership team meeting to support you around that. So it's a very high touch partnership. That's what real, true, to get execution to the level we want to get it to in any of our partnerships. It's got to be that level of that level of frequency. But I want to make sure that folks are clear that it's not like time stops when we're there and principals and school leaders don't do anything but spend time with us. It's not the case.
How many staff do you have, and how many schools are you doing? I know you're doing TLA. How many other schools are you doing this for?
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard for us to share that because we work with Philadelphia Public Schools, and that's 216 schools. So is that one partner or is it 216, right? And we work with the Archdiocese of Chicago, which I think is 156 schools. So is that one or is it 156? And we don't necessarily work with every single one of those schools, but yeah, I mean, we have dozens and dozens of partners around the U.S. and, some very big, some standalone. We have some folks. We have 3 schools in right about 45 minutes outside of Dubuque, Iowa. Relatively small schools. So I don't know if I can give you an accurate answer there, but we do have a pretty fair mix of faith-based, traditional public, and charter schools. It's almost like a 35-30 type thing. And in terms of staff, we shrunk the team quite a bit. I have 5 full-time staff, and then we have consultants all over the place, including down the road in Milwaukee, where we have quite a few folks.
So you could do several schools. I mean, obviously you do bigger districts, you do smaller districts, so you could do more than one school if we wanted to do something like that.
Yeah, we would have the capacity to do that. I think I'll defer to the powers that be on my side to see if that's of interest, but, we certainly have the capacity to do that.
But we wouldn't necessarily expect anybody else to be part of it. Yeah. Interested in it.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Megan.
Thank you so much. That was a really wonderful presentation, and also
Thanks,
thank you for the opportunity to have kind of the meet and greet thing. It was really great speaking with you. Couple of questions. You had talked about defining, which I fully support, what good looks like. To what extent are you aware of the work that has already occurred here in the school district of Beloit?
I have a preliminary understanding of that, but I do not have a deep knowledge of the work that you all have done behind the scenes, or maybe out in the open.
Okay, the reason I ask is that back in 2019, we began an initiative with it's a public-private partnership called Ford NGL, which is its own conversation. But one of the outcomes of that was to establish a portrait of a graduate, which is work that was district-led, but very much in collaboration with the business community and other stakeholders. And so that is something that we have. It's embedded into kind of our practice as a district. How does that impact what you believe your, itinerary is the wrong word, but kind of like your priorities might be working with one of our schools?
So, as I mentioned, and it's a great question, Megan, we are mostly agnostic to what the school is doing, assuming it's not harming kids, which is very, very rare. But even, if you think about some of the tutoring stuff that Sarah's going to talk about momentarily, we worked with schools that have, in New York City, who have 70 to 100 tutors on site in their buildings. We work around, we look at how effectively that's being done, if that's something that the leader wants us to focus on. Sometimes we don't touch that stuff at all, and we say that exists in its own universe. But what we say to our partners is it's not about the thing, it's about how well you do the thing. And so if you say, or if we got to a school and said, wow, this program is being done at an exemplar level, great. We don't touch it. We don't even talk about it. I mean, I want to talk about it to learn about it, but we're not going to give feedback around something that's going great. Now, if it's not going terribly well, that's certainly a place where we can add value. But any sort of existing programming, anything that's already in place, I'm not suggesting we would never tweak anything, a culture, code of conduct, or something like that. Even things like, a lunch protocol, like, you're in a lunchroom and there are 5 adults there to support students, but they're on their phones, and there's never been an expectation around that, and the school leader says, yeah, that's actually not effective. Great. We'll tweak a code of conduct to include stuff like that, or actually that would be a handbook. But in terms of changing things, we don't do any of that.
Thank you so much. We touched on this a little bit, just in our own conversation about just data and things like that. So, I'll bring that up at a later discussion with my colleagues on the board. But
Right.
I guess in your experience, you certainly have very broad reach with a lot of different districts, and I think that's an asset that you have to provide. Typically, in a situation outside of this one, in a district our size, would you typically begin with a school? Would you typically begin with district level? How has that worked with larger districts?
Yes, it's a great question. This partnership for us is unique. We don't have any partnerships where it's just one school of many. And if there are some partnerships where we have a handful of schools, for instance, Milwaukee Public Schools, we have, half a dozen to a dozen schools. Those are less pilots and more the philanthropist who funds us said, we want you to work with these 8 schools. And so we said, sure. This program at this point is a little bit unique because it is let's pressure test this in one place. Let's see what the appetite is. Let's see if we can support folks in the way that we know how, but let's see if folks are willing and able to do it. To your point, we always try to start as high up, for lack of a better term, on the food chain as possible, talking to superintendents, supporting folks at the district and network level when the partnership is larger. Alignment across schools is key. Anytime we're working with multiple schools, the first thing I want to know is, are there aligned systems and protocols so that the school over here is not doing something radically different than the school over here, because autonomy is a weird word in education. It's the least autonomous job on the planet. We tell everybody what time to be there, where to go, when they can eat, who their students are, and then we talk about autonomy. For us, it's like, well, if this school's knocking it out of the park on this thing, let's all do it. Or if they're doing actually a really poor job, but this school's doing a great job, you do what they're doing. So if it's a larger partnership, even just multiple schools, we'll always start at the district level to see how much alignment we can get on the front end.
That makes so much sense. Yeah, very the same page, and I really appreciate you speaking to that point. Last question, just in terms of practicality. What has been your experience with the range of buy-in from instructional coaches? And the reason that I ask is that our district has strategically prioritized working with coaches as part of our school improvement. Like we have an AGR obligation. There's certain funding that we get from DPI to invest in increasing our academic outcomes, and the coaching model has been one that has been invested in heavily. That is not in any way to say that I'm not like trying to shut down any.
No,
I just want to be clear
here.
because I know Ms. Furseth made some comments about that which are not accurate, but I just do want to, I am very open to hearing what you have to say. The reason I ask that is that you talked a lot about like buy-in and autonomy, and I think, anybody knows you can have the absolute best thing in the world, and if people don't buy into it, it's good. It's good as it's buy-in, right?
Yeah.
So I would love to know if you could please speak to some, I guess, your range of experiences with how you've been able to enter into productive, gainful relationships
Yeah.
with the existing cultures of instructional coaching.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, our model is different than really anything out there because of the level of not just detail, but of prescription that we provide, which doesn't mean there's not room for coaches to freelance at times. But when we've gotten pushback from coaches, it has every single time been from, I don't want to tell another adult what to do. And this model requires that happens. Now, it happens politely, with empathy, it happens in a supportive way, but there are just things that are true in schools that too many people act like are unfigure-outable. And our models are the opposite of that. There are things that are just true. Teachers need to do X, Y, and Z things to be effective. Leaders need to do A, B, and C things to be effective, and lots more as well. So what we found is that coaches really like our model because it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. And in too many places, coaches really have devolved, this is not on them, but they've almost devolved into what we refer to as friendly helpers. They knock on the door, hey, do you need anything? Oh, yeah, I can grab your copies, that's okay. They are rarely the people who are, in a very intentional way, driving the instructional program and pushing folks toward instructional gains. So our model, for the folks who are hungry for it, takes a lot of the guesswork out of it, and they're actually excited about it. But I'll be transparent here. We had a partnership with a district in North Texas. They had 12 instructional coaches. At the end of the year one with Skyrocket, 7 of the 12 left. Now, some of them wanted to go into different leadership roles, but some folks were like, yeah, I liked it better when a teacher was teaching main idea, I shared a resource from when I taught main idea, and that was our relationship, versus, hey, I was in your classroom, you have 27 students, 4 ahead, heads down, this happened, you gave directions at 9:31, you said X, at 9:34, 50% of the class had not begun writing yet. And of course, a lot of our feedback is rooted in glows and positivity. I'm sharing the opposite here, but there's an equal part of, and maybe even more so, of the things that the teacher and the leaders are doing well.
No,
Is that helpful?
Oh, no, totally. That makes a ton of, there's always room for growth in assets-based feedback. No, it makes total sense to me.
Great.
Thank you so much for taking the time to respond.
Thanks, Megan.
Can I ask a follow-up to Megan's other question? When you have multiple schools, does it help to have multiple, so that people can you train principals together, and then they can support one another and talk to each other about how things are working? Is that, you find that to be a benefit when you work with schools?
Yeah, it's one of the weird things about our field that you might not know what the school 200 yards away is doing, right? And we're so busy and there's so much to do. So the answer is yes. I don't know if that's on the table for this work, but the more we can get more leaders together, speaking the same language. And that's one of the things about Skyrocket, and I hope this doesn't sound immodest. It's not me, it's the model, but it gives people a shared language that's oftentimes missing in schools, a shared way of talking, a shared way of seeing things. So the more folks we can get in on that, the better. The problem is that training folks without the on-site support, I say it's like an appetizer. Like you go out to dinner, the appetizer's good, but if you left after that, you'd be like, wow, that feels like I feel ripped off. And so the problem is we want to make sure that if we're actually coaching people or training them, rather in some sort of cohort model, that they're also getting the on-site support to reinforce those skills on site.
Do you use a lot of staff development days, pre-service days to set those things up? How does that work?
Yeah. I mean, I have to look at, the answer is yes. I would, if this winds up happening, we'd have to look at calendars and see what makes the most sense. But yes, summer training, PD days, any sort of Wednesday PD or Thursday PD or Friday, whatever day you all have, but making sure that we're using those days really strategically to build staff skill.
Brian, do you have any questions?
All right.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks,
All right,
friends.
Dr.
Appreciate
Anderson, did you have any questions? Okay. Okay. Okay.
I gave additional knowledge this time around.
Okay, thank you.
I will.
Oh.
Michael, I will say thank you. I think you've opened more of my eyes, and I think hopefully for the rest of the board. I can't speak for the other board members, but you know what you're doing, and that's what we need at the school district of Beloit. So, thank you for being here. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Hi there. I'm Sarah Scott Frank, the founder and CEO of Open Literacy, and thank you. As I want to echo the thanks for coming to yet another meeting this week. I did live stream the meeting. Was it Monday, Tuesday? The days are bleeding together, and so what you're going to hear tonight is not necessarily an overview of open literacy. I'm assuming you understand how our high-impact one-to-one virtual tutoring program works, but more a response to the questions that seem to be surfacing and that I've heard across repeated sessions, both the original presentation and then in this week's meeting. I also just want to sort of mark that one thing that I'm really excited about in this proposal is the symmetry that we see between Skyrocket and open literacy and the shared values that span both of our organizations, thinking deeply about the 8 facets that Michael talked about in communication, accountability, data, goal setting. Not one of the 8 facets of relationships really undergirds a lot of our work. So there's just a lot of symmetry between the 2 organizations that I think will allow us to think at a systems level that is often not present in proposals like this. So it's just a really exciting facet that I want to name. So tonight I'll tell you a little bit about the origin story of open literacy, and then I'll take you inside a pilot that we've been part of because you're being asked to participate in a pilot. And I think there's some really important lessons learned in the pilot that open literacy has been part of. I also want to respond to the idea of how this might fit into a strategic plan. There was an email from a community member, as well as questions from the board around that. I want to address the importance of parents as partners. I see that Andrea is back, and obviously they are a critical part of the conversation. The number of seats that are allocated, and thinking about how open literacy works and could work in Beloit relative to other models and what the research says around those models. And we'll end with talking about sustainability and success. So a little bit about open literacy gives you a chance to learn a little bit about me as a leader and why I started open literacy. So I came to this work from having a really nice job as a Research 1 professor at the University of Pittsburgh. And I got to do research on reading comprehension and understanding teacher education. And it felt really far from the work of teachers and classrooms and kids and families. And so I quit. And I started open literacy so that I could get back in the trenches. I wanted to be sort of close to the bone of the work of teaching and the messiness of schools and districts. Since 2020, open literacy has focused exclusively on one-to-one tutoring, but that hasn't been what we've done since, that hasn't been our only work since 2013. So we've brought all of those lessons learned over the past decade to our work in high-impact tutoring. So let's go inside this OUSD pilot. OUSD stands for Oakland Unified School District in California. It's a rather large district. There's 53 elementary schools, for example, so it doesn't match Beloit in scale. It does match Beloit in terms of need around reading. So 80% of kids in Oakland aren't reading at grade level. There's a good percentage of English learners in Oakland. And I want you to think about this pilot in terms of your thinking about why are we only doing one school? Because I hear that thread in your questions, and I think it's an important thread because there's a lot of need. In Oakland, a foundation called Eat, Learn, Play, which is led by Steph and Aisha Curry. If you're not a basketball fan, Steph Curry's a very good basketball player. And they've made this big investment in tutoring in Oakland. And this multi-year commitment has been transformative for the district in a couple of ways. Having a multi-year commitment has given the district some breathing room to think about what do our systems look like. So I think we see a multi-year commitment in the proposal on the table here that's very similar. It's a very place-based investment. They're committed to Oakland, California, much like this proposal is committed to Beloit, Wisconsin. They've made a very strong commitment to learning from the pilot. So you'll see it every step of the way. We started small, we grew a little more, and this year we're at full implementation. And by sort of going slow to go fast, we've gotten a lot better. And we've built buy-in along the way. The foundation came to the district with very clear non-negotiables. And that has been a gift to us as an organization because it's brokered the relationship with the district, but it's also, people and press come to me and say, what's it like to work with Oakland? And they expect me to spill some tea that's quite negative. And I say, it's a dream. It's been amazing. It's been some of the most meaningful work I've done in my entire career. And that, I think, is in part because of the very intentional design that has rolled out over the past 3 years. So here's what it looked like. Well, let me give you this framing first. So while you're thinking, like, why are we doing just one school? I actually think the framework that operated well in Oakland was to pilot, obsessively learn from the pilot, align across the district, and scale appropriately. It is really tempting. I think tutoring is a very sexy intervention. It's very effective. So it would have been tempting to say, let's do all 53. but they started with a coalition of the willing, and that momentum made this a successful program. In our first year, we had 500 kids across 3 providers. That means we had like 175 kids. I think that year we served about 224 students total. What they called the year-long pilot served 1,200 students across 3 providers. So we spent a year, we each had about 11 schools. And then this current school year, there's 1,500 students across 2 providers. So they used the data to actually reduce the number of providers, and they split the district in half across providers. And this is just a slightly more detailed view of that. So 6 schools and 200 students, 93% of students saw meaningful growth. In a tier 3 intervention, so sort of the students identified as hardest to move. In the full year pilot, we had 500 students across 11 schools. And on the SERP evaluation, we had the highest growth compared to the other 2 providers. And then this year we have this district-wide evaluation with 27 schools, and we're part of a randomized control trial with Johns Hopkins. Our goal is to get the ESSA Tier 1 evidence from that. And that study is not designed to sort of put the 2 providers in a horse race against each other. It's actually designed, the question that they're asking this year is, how are all the MTSS systems in Oakland supporting students to become proficient readers? So they have this multi-tiered intervention. What's happening in the classroom, what's happening in small group instruction, and what's happening in one-to-one instruction, and they're trying to understand that implementation. I think the big lessons learned over the past 3 years is to start small and really build a true partnership, to be intentional about learning from the pilots and iterating, so treating the pilot as a pilot. What did we learn from this? What can we do better? The intentional supports that Open Literacy now has across our entire curriculum came out of our data for English learners who were not moving at the same rate as the other students. And so if you look deep into our curriculum, you will see now there are a range of amazing intentional supports for our English learners so that those students are receiving the support they need to make the same pace of growth as other students. We've done a better job over the years to become a true ally to teachers. So how do you build teacher buy-in? How do you make this resource something that teachers view as making their job more doable and sustainable? If you have to teach students and you have to move them 2 grade levels, 3 grade levels to get to grade level, you need an ally to do that job. The work is just too hard. So how can something like high impact tutoring make the job more doable and sustainable? And then thinking about the system. So how do you develop systems that allow for coherence between what's happening in the classroom and what's happening in tutoring? I don't know what word that's supposed to be, but I think at one point it said supporting and now it says opportunity. We're going to move on. So let's think about what it looks like to support a coherent literacy plan. So we're not designing your MTSS system. That's not Open Literacy's job. But I'd like you to imagine how something like a well-designed high-impact tutoring program in Tier 3 could spark the design and support the design of a Tier 2 and a Tier 1 that has some coherence, that makes sense across a system. How can it fit into a system? How can it become part of the fabric of what happens in a Beloit school? And I think the systems level work that Skyrocket brings, that Open Literacy loves to think about and be part of, is a really exciting part of this proposal. Now let's talk about parents, my favorite topic. I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old at home. And parents, as Andrea noted earlier this week, are students' first teachers. They're also really important partners in this conversation. So Open Literacy has a number of ways in which we engage parents by hosting an introduction to tutoring program, sending progress reports, sending engagement initiatives for school breaks, and having resources on our website like decodables and phonics games that parents can play. If asked, we'll provide resources for a school literacy night or any sort of literacy events just to encourage that connection. We also have individualized learning plans for every student. And when parents ask, we can provide access to those learning plans so parents can see with a lot of transparency the exact lessons that their students are getting. They could review them with students. They could look at the stories that they read. So there's an opportunity for transparency that's really easy to access through just a Google link. And then parents, we can talk about how parents are partners in this work for getting kids to school, for supporting strong school attendance, for accessing the materials on our website. So this dialogic conversation between open literacy and parents is an important one, and one that we hope to be part of the conversation. Just 60 students. This is a popular question. You want more. And it's important that you think of these as seats and not students. So the seats, they're not. The seat is not tied to a particular student, and students can graduate out of the program, and so other students can come in. And it goes back. I want you to think about this systems level work that they're doing. So how do these 60 seats give you an opportunity to think about the system and to think about what role these seats play in a broader system? And I will note that every district that has scaled successfully has started small. So they haven't gone for the whole enchilada from the start. They've started small, like you saw with Oakland, and then they've carefully grown. So MCP in Milwaukee is a nice example. They actually also work with Skyrocket. They had 80 seats last year across 2 schools, and this year they have 200 seats across 4 schools, and they're knocking it out of the park. So it's been a really nice evolution where they started small to go fast. And then this last point here is thinking about the key features of the open literacy model and why aren't we using another model. So there is a little bit of magic to the virtual model that a decade ago I probably wouldn't have said was a good idea. But as we've developed better technologies for online learning, as we've thought a lot about virtual conferencing and that's become more accessible, there's a huge advantage to doing one-to-one virtual tutoring from a scheduling perspective, from the regularity of having the tutor, and from the regularity of having the tutoring. So we have a detailed subsystem. If a tutor's going to be absent, there's always a sub there. So tutoring's going to happen. It's, if the tutor can't get there because of snow, for in-person tutoring, tutoring doesn't happen. And so there's a lot of advantages to really maximizing the minutes in the virtual model. Open literacy is aligned with the UFly scope and sequence, which I know that you already are using in intervention in Beloit. Importantly, we don't use the UFly curriculum. We use their same scope and sequence, and we address some of the sticky points. So UFly is designed as a tier 1 intervention, but we see in the data, kids get stuck at some key points like blends as they move from reading words with 3 letters to reading words with 4. They get a little bit stuck. And working on fluency and working on comprehension. So we have some other materials that we've developed that sort of supplement and make sure that students are making progress. And then we have the intensive EL supports that I referenced. Open Literacy also uses certified teachers who have deep literacy expertise. We get the joy of hiring just 1 in 20 applicants. They have an average of 15.4 years experience right now. And we also participate in a lot of coaching with them. We can jump into a tutoring session and do some live coaching, especially if they're wondering about a student who's not making the progress that's expected. And so the question that's on the table from the board is, why not do in-person tutoring? Why not use paraprofessionals? And I want to name 2 things here. The first is that Oakland does a ton of in-person tutoring, in-person small group tutoring using early lit tutors. And that's a successful model. And yet they still have high dosage one-to-one tutoring. Why? Because the need is so enormous in Oakland. So they have a multi-pronged solution. And that multi-pronged solution includes both small group instruction for Tier 2 intervention using early lit tutors and one-to-one high-impact tutoring. They also will name that there are a bunch of staffing challenges with getting the same number of minutes for small group instruction as high-impact tutoring, because it's really hard to staff those paraprofessionals. As we look at the research on the tutoring models, there's sort of 3 buckets we can move through. The first bucket of research for tutoring is tutoring writ large. And tutoring writ large is a banger intervention. It gets great results. Almost, it's kind of like pizza. Pizza in any form is kind of good. And tutoring in any form is kind of good. The second bucket is tutoring during the school day with teachers and paraprofessionals. Most of that research is K-12. It's any subject area, and it's agnostic with regard to, is it a teacher or is it a para? So they don't tease it out. It's like you have this instructional person, they are trained, and they do a good job. And there's great effect sizes there. And then there's this last bucket that really digs down into reading tutoring, and specifically reading tutoring with struggling readers. And that's where you see that having a certified teacher makes a big difference. And if we want to move fast, which we don't have time, if you're 2 grade levels behind and you're going to go to 4th grade, 5th grade, being too, like, we got to move. So the most high impact intervention for working with struggling readers is going to be your certified teachers. And that's what open literacy brings to the table. Finally, as we think about sustainability, as you think about these 3 years that are on the table for the proposal, I invite you to think about year 1 as systems building, year 2 as an opportunity for refinement, how do we get really good, and year 3 as a positioning for the broader system. So how are we going to fund this for the long term? What are our braided sources of funding? How do we want to change and expand? So I think this 3-year runway gives you a nice space to think about that. I keep saying finally. This is really the final one. So what does success look like? We expect strong literacy growth. We don't have any schools where kids aren't making growth. But the real success metric is Beloit at a systems level, and thinking about, is this reducing the number of students who need Tier 3 support? Is tutoring a successful intervention for Beloit? And I remind you that this is not a proprietary solution. So you'll learn things through this pilot, and those will stay here. So this is an amazing opportunity for Beloit to learn and grow. And at the end of 3 years, whether that includes open literacy or not, you will be in a different place than you were when you started at the beginning of the pilot. Questions?
Thank you, Sarah. Any board members have questions for Sarah? Megan?
Oh, yeah, no, sure. Okay. Is that all right? Okay. All right. No, well, thank you, Sarah, so much. This was a wonderful presentation, and thank you so much for taking the time to physically be here with us. It's wonderful to meet you. So a couple things, kind of similar question that I had for Michael. To what extent are you aware of, I guess, like our MTSS or EMLSS that it currently exists within our elementary schools?
I'm aware of the curriculum tools that you're using, such as ARC and UFly in Tier 3. And so, like Michael, I have a preliminary understanding of your programs.
Not the resources. Like, to what extent are you aware of like our systems that exist?
I am not aware of your systems.
Okay, so that would be one thing that I think would be good for us to kind of get on the same page about, right? Because I think open literacy is, as you mentioned, it's high impact, right? Tier 3, right? Because it's one-on-one high dosage, intense intervention. I think like one thing that like from a board perspective that I think would be important is like if we embark on a relationship, like we want to make sure it's effective and that it fits within an existing system. I think I heard you say earlier too, with your Oakland experience, which makes a ton of sense. And I mean, celebrate you for having the wisdom to start that way. You start small, right, where there's buy-in and where it'll work. So I just, one thing that as a board member, I just want to bring up to my colleagues here, like I think we need to really be mindful about like, bless you, where that starting point would best be and making sure that it fits within the systems that do already exist. So that's just one thing I wanted to ask about and just to bring up to.
Can I comment on that?
Please, yeah.
So that was actually an important part of the conversation with principals. Yeah. Like, when does this happen? Where does this happen? Like, and so we had a really nice conversation about the conditions for success. And we have lessons learned. Like, Beloit will be more successful because of the lessons learned over the past several years in districts like Oakland. So how do you schedule? How do you get it? What does a bell schedule look like that accommodates tutoring in a really efficient way? How do you communicate with teachers about the role of tutoring in the bigger ecosystem? How do you fit it in with existing Tier 3 and Tier 2 support? 60 seats isn't going to serve all the students who are receiving intervention in the school. So what do those conversations look like? And so that conversation about conditions for success was part of my presentation and also raised by principals. And I think that's a critical conversation for thinking about how you bring a program in that becomes part of an existing system. I referenced in the principals meeting that my very favorite reform book is called Tinkering Towards Utopia. And in that book, Tayek and Cuban talk about incremental change and what does that look like. And so you can't just come in guns a-blazing and say, here we are. You have to think about how you accommodate those existing systems. And that's an important part of Skyrocket's work as well.
Thank you so much. Another question that I have is when we talk about growth, and I'm aware of like how like Dibbles and ORF are integrated within the program, and that's like wonderful stuff. One thing that we have to consider because of, title, AGR, and just like the way that Wisconsin, I mean, and like Michael and I were saying earlier, a lot of it's very similar, right, between states. But, Wisconsin has its own unique, state report card pieces and all kinds of, the nuances of that. So what is the externally validated kind of data, like in terms of transferability and sustainability? For example, growing on Dibbles is wonderful, like Maze, like all the good things. Like I see a lot of growth in my students. I've been a reading interventionist this is my 7th year, reading intervention in general, where that's like my only thing. But those gains don't always transfer, right, to sort of the higher stakes standardized test pieces that often districts in schools, right, are judged on. And so I'm just sort of wondering, part one of my question is, in your tenure with open literacy, what has been your experience with transferability, and are there specific districts or types of districts that have worked better or whatever? My second question. Actually, I'm going to pause.
Sure. Yeah.
There.
I was going to say, can I answer that?
I just didn't want to lose that, but yeah, you're good. I got you.
So as you think about benchmark testing, like iReady, and you think about a student who is a 3rd grader reading at a kindergarten level, or 3rd grader reading at a 5th grader reading at a 3rd. All these students exist in Beloit. Those tests are not going to be sensitive. The 5th grader who's making huge gains on 1st grade level work and 2nd grade level work and 3rd grade level work, and we are dancing in the streets because of this child's growth, is not going to look different on that 5th grade test, because the 5th grade test is measuring 5th grade work. And the same is true with Dibbles. So the 5th grade Dibbles is a 5th grade level test measuring 5th grade reading. So the 5th grader reading at even a 2nd or 3rd grade level, if that child makes any growth on 5th grade in the first half of the year, for example, if we look at the mid-year data, we should be absolutely thrilled. That is awesome. But it raises this bigger question. The other big thing is that constructs like vocabulary are incredibly hard to move. So much of a vocabulary knowledge is eaten up by a child's background knowledge, right? And so you have these huge big bucket, like math, everything you need to know for math can be taught in school. What a gift. And that is not true for reading, because for comprehension and vocabulary, so much of it is tied into a student's background knowledge. And 70% of the variance is eaten up by their zip code. But that can't be our answer. Our answer has to be to stick with a program and have a plan so that that fifth grader can read at a third grade level by the end of year one. And that child who moves to sixth grade can read at a fifth grade level by the end of year two. And then in that third year, we will see that child reading it. That's the long game that we have to play. When you have students who are reading so far behind, you have to think about those tests slightly differently. You're not going to see a huge jump in year one, but you might in year three. And that's just the nature of the game.
Yeah, no, I mean, same page. You don't have to convince me that standardized tests are garbage and like we shouldn't even do them. So like we're good. I mean, that's obviously like I'm sure yours as well, like lived experience with students. The reason that I ask is because like our district is often judged and I think often mischaracterized and sometimes just flat out lied about based on arbitrary scores that like in many ways are meaningless or tell a very partial, out of context picture about like the growth that does happen like for our students. You know, my now second grade daughter's first grade teacher is right here, and like last year she was like on a reading plan, and this year she's reading to me before she goes to bed. I mean, growth happens, right, in plateaus and then spikes, right, because like kids are different, there's asynchronous development, all the things. So yeah, 100% same page, and I really appreciate the context you provided around that. I just know that that's going to be a metric that we are held accountable to as a board, and I just wanted to like kind of feel out and get your perspective and, you know, get some of your experience with that from open literacy. You actually segued into my second question really beautifully. I'm concerned also about our sustainability over time, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with like research on like Orton Gillingham, for example, where they see like huge gains and then we flatline and then we decline. So that's
Megan, this is my very favorite question of all time.
I know, and I was going to say like you should probably like stay in town. WSRA conferences next week. We could probably talk for hours, and I would love that. But my question is what are, I guess, do you have some metrics or some things that you believe are unique to your programming?
I do. I have an answer.
Okay, and I would be curious, and I want to hear your answer, so I'm going to stop talking, but I am curious, maybe a follow-up conversation that you could have with our building leaders, our teachers, our instructional coaches and reading specialists would be, to what extent are some of those features already in place? Because I just want to make sure that we are like removing the correct barriers. So that's the spirit in which I'm asking the question, just to be clear, but please.
Oh, I love this question. I could talk about this question all night. I have a PhD in reading comprehension. There not many people can make that claim. So if you look at the Reading First data from 2001, No Child Left Behind, Part B, the data all has the exact same shape. I was the evaluator in the state of Michigan at that time. The data goes up, that's the decoding, and then it flatlines. If you look at the UK data from 2012, the data goes up and it flatlines. And that flat line is reading comprehension. And the science of reading in many spaces has been interpreted to be phonics. And we are going to get data that looks exactly the same. We're going to over-index on word reading. We're going to have kids taking, I saw this in Detroit, kids taking home nonsense word lists and practicing nonsense words instead of reading real words. But one huge thing built into open literacy is that we care about building that reading comprehension muscle from the very beginning. When a child is reading the word crab, I care deeply that they're imagining that little red crab dancing across the sand. Our tutors are trained around the reading comprehension model for even foundation skills. Often districts say, we want to do foundational skills. We don't care about comprehension, which is, I think, short-sighted, because we have to care about comprehension. It's the other side of the reading rope. I see the teachers in the room nodding, right? And your third grade teachers, your fifth grade teachers, your middle school teachers don't want a whole bunch of kids who can read a page and not understand what they're reading. And so we don't want a whole bunch of word callers. And so, we could think about, like, are there building level training so that we can think about the role of comprehension in the classroom as in that tier 1, as we build a system that cares deeply about both kids reading words and kids comprehending what they read.
No, absolutely. Just a quick follow-up question, then I just have one more staffing clarification I'd like to make with you, and then I'm good. But happy to chat anytime. It's really fun.
I'll talk about comprehension anytime.
Well, and actually, so the follow-up question I have, and I just to be clear, just I'm not only just nerding out right now. I just want to, I'm just given what I know about like what we, models that we have had, and I'm sure still to some extent do have here in the district. A lot of it's built on like neurocognitive theory and things like that, like Andrew Johnson and like Donna Scanlon's work with like set for variability. Can you speak to like how do you feel navigating a landscape where we're under Act 20, which has a law? I mean, we have a law in Wisconsin that tells us that 3Qing, which is a natural neurocognitive process, is like somehow illegal. And so, like, what would you say to a school district, like, or potentially our school district that's held to Act 20, where we're not allowed by state law to implement any practices that rely on the neurocognitive model that you just touched on?
I think the reason that 3Qing has come under fire is because it is deeply focused on kids' mistakes. And it's linked very deeply to the whole language model. If you look at balanced literacy and the research on balanced literacy as it was intended to be implemented, it kind of gets it right. But
Totally agree, yeah.
it sort of, the pendulum swung very, very far to, we'll call it the right or the left, I don't know, away from phonics instruction. And so you lost the balance. And so students were not being taught how to decode. Students were being asked to guess words based on pictures. And that hasn't served students well. 60% of students need explicit phonics instruction. They also need to ask themselves, what is this text about? And, what is happening in this paragraph? We need them to comprehend. So, the idea that 3Qing is illegal, I think what undergirds that is the idea that asking kids to guess what a word is without looking at the code is not a great idea.
Well, no, and I think you and I both know that that's not actually like how those neurocognitive processes work, and that we're looking at graphophonic cues and things like that when we're talking about visual cueing. And so I'm just wondering, like, with the open literacy's approach to comprehension, I mean, how, like, are you in that, like, kind of the Scanlon-Johnson ballpark about just like the neurocognitive model, and like, like you were just talking about actually like with CRAB and like with multisensory connections to language to build that background knowledge and vocabulary?
We lean heavily on the landscape model, the idea that kids are making a mental model in their head when they're reading the word.
Perfect. Okay, no, that's really helpful. I appreciate that. And I think that's something that like our district is already like, we have like a really good rich history, and I feel like that could be a potential good fit as well. But I really think that a good next step would be to, I think we as a board, and I'm saying this like to us, not to you, you're doing a great job doing what you're doing. As a board, I think it's kind of on us that we need to hear from our principals, like about, to what extent, right? Like are some of these systems already still in place? Like I have had some extensive conversations at like one school in particular where I know that we have all the pieces, and like the main barrier is staffing. And then, so I'm, just I guess my follow-up question then too would be like in a situation where like, let's say we hear like everyone's super thrilled and we're stoked to do the things, but they're like, but as you mentioned, conditions for success, if they're not there, like what, I guess like in the spirit of going slow to going fast, what would be your hope from us as a board, right, to like make this sustainable in the district if we don't currently have at this right now present moment? Not to say that we can't, right, but like today, it's still January somehow, right, at this present moment, what would your hope be that we would do to build that capacity, and what would your ideal timeline be?
based on what I heard from principals today and the ones who were very excited about it, I'm not worried about them not having the conditions for success.
Okay, so like you heard from principals that we have like staffing and schedules and space.
I did.
Awesome, thank you, that's great to hear.
Carol?
Yeah, I just, you started talking a little Greek there, and I'm an educator, so that, some of that was kind of way over my head. But I do know, and I do remember, that we've had trouble in the past with Tier 3 interventions. This was kind of hard to do some of those. And also, the state of Wisconsin does support some of those things. We do have a grant that calls that we could use the money for tutoring with licensed teachers, and we get some of that funding. So we do have some funding sources to scale up some things in a different way. And I appreciate your conversation about going slow too, because I probably need that. I'm one that kind of wants to jump fast. But on the other hand, we're also a small district, and we're getting smaller, and we do need to really kind of do some things to pull ourselves together, and to have everybody working together on similar things might be a benefit to the district as a whole. To your point about testing and scaling up, yeah, we need to do a little bit better job of our own on working on growth data and some of those kinds of things, because it is real that we have kids who, they're in that bottom scoring area, and they could be making tremendous strides and still be in that bottom scoring area, but they do look at growth, and we need to be focusing in on some of those kinds of things. But I think as a Tier 3 intervention, being able to provide tutoring with licensed teachers would be a wonderful thing for a lot of our students. So, thank you.
I do want to add, Carol, something that your comment sparked is that open literacy does bring some capacity around meeting the requirements of Act 20. The individualized learning plan meets that requirement. The communication that we can generate from that learning plan for families can meet some of that requirement. So in terms of alleviating some of the paperwork, obviously meeting the spirit of the law in serving students, but also there's some paperwork burden around that our tools meet.
Yeah, and we didn't really talk about it with Skyrocket, but I'm sure there's a parent component with that as well. I mean, the more you talk about the culture of the building, the more you've got to have a parent component involved in that. We did have somebody here the other day that was concerned about that. I don't think that really needs to be a concern. I think obviously the parents are going to be involved and have opportunities for involvement in both of these things if and when we move forward. But yeah, I think to be able to say we're meeting some of those reading plans would be very helpful to staff as well as to the parents.
And then we can do summer virtual tutoring to meet the summer. You have to provide a summer program, so it can meet that.
Quick follow-up question, since you mentioned Act 20 again with plans and that, what would you say like your best target grade level group would be? Because I think Ms. First said you said the other night like first and second.
I mean, we serve kids well in grades 1 through 5. As I said, gosh, I'm forgetting where I'm talking. I think this was in the principal meeting. The runway is shorter in first grade and second grade and third grade. And so getting kids to grade level can happen faster. You can sort of, reduce the burden on the system. And so I think the strategy from the foundation of saying, like, let's focus on 1, 2, and 3 so that you can transform the pipeline is part of the thinking there. But I mean, I love those 4th and 5th graders, so I don't want to discount them.
Thank you so much.
Brian?
Thank you. Sarah, thanks for a great presentation. I have some things to share that, we do have a lot of great teachers. There's 3 of them sitting here in the room tonight. We've got some great administration. We've got some great things going on with our academy. Just found out this morning that our jazz band is going to Essential Ellington for the 13th time, I think, in May, April, May. So we got a lot of things going on. However, we need to build a base so that the graduation rate, the portrait of a graduation of a graduate is more a higher rating than it is right now. So our forward exam rates in the fall, reported in the fall, were, English was 20.9, reading was 23.1, and writing was 21.4. And I believe writing goes hand in hand with reading. If you can't read, you can't write, and vice versa. So I think this is a great place to start, and start building that foundation 1 year at a time. And I consider this the answer to prayers for the city of Beloit and the school district of Beloit. Our city's been asking for this for a long time. I've only lived here 5 years, but I know that. And so thank you both. I think this is a great idea and a great plan. And I think if we don't do this, we're going to be scratching our heads, and that hurts for me, in a couple of years. So that's my take. Thank you both. Appreciate it. And thank you, Lisa, and the foundation. And
Are there any other board member questions? I have one, Sarah. How is it determined with just 60 slots which students receive the tutoring first? And I know that the 85% attendance is part of the expectation. Do you look at the students' attendance rate this year if we go with this in determining, okay, this student was only present 60% of the time, so we can't take that student? Is there a discussion with the parent and the teacher? How is that determined?
Actually, I'm going to answer that for Sarah, is that the district determines who has the slots.
Yeah.
It's not Sarah. The district will work with the principals to determine who the 60 slots are. So that's our decision as a district.
And some of the criteria that you might consider, attendance, obviously, but thinking about the ecosystem, who is serving these kids? What does tier 3 look like? What does tier 2 look like? What is the overall need? And how do you best want to sort of get the most bang for your buck with these 60 seats? And so different districts take different approaches. Some put the hardest to move kids with us so that their in-person folks can serve other students in small groups. Some give us all the bubble kids because they want to transform their pipeline. Some give a mix. And so it really does depend on your ecosystem and your needs and what's already in place as you decide those kids.
Earlier you said there are 60 spaces or 60 slots, and some students may graduate. Can you explain what graduating out means?
Sure. So a second grader gets to the end of the foundation sequence. They complete our foundations mastery. They're very confident. They're testing at grade level in their middle of the year benchmark assessment or above grade level. We love to see that. And so we have a conversation and say, Tia looks like, she's finished. She's reading at the end of our foundation sequence, which is the end of second grade. What are you seeing in your data? And the school writes back and says, yeah, that's what we're seeing in our data. And we make a decision together that Tia's going to exit and a new student's going to take that slot.
Has there ever been a case where a student graduates but then is not doing so well and needs to return?
To date, no. But we don't want to exit them too soon. We're not super quick to exit, like right when they get there, because we want to give them a little runway, especially if they're returning to a classroom that doesn't have a regular, that has a permanent long-term sub. we want to make sure that they're getting reading instruction. And so we look closely at that. And that's a conversation with the school.
Thank you, Sarah. Dr. Anderson, did you have any questions or anything?
No, I just want to express my gratitude for the opportunity to learn. So, I mean, we're all learners, so I learned more today. And looking at Skyrocket for me is not only a professional development, looks like a leadership development. And as I mentioned to Mike earlier, I think every one of us as leaders want to get better. So I look forward if we can go through with this, which I hope we do, that we can all become better learners and we can use open literacy to help some children to a better extent than we're currently helping them. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Lisa. Lisa, did you have any other statements? Thank you. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Brian Nichols, second by Carol Fox. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Oh, sorry, I was still saying aye.
Motion carries. We are adjourned at 6:31.